What's crack-a-lackin', everyone, and welcome back to Bo Maths. So today we're going to be applying another operation to the number line. We've done addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So what else could there be left that we're going to be looking at? Well, we're going to be applying a negative to the number line, right? If we have a 3, we can make it into -3 by applying a negative, and we get -3. So we're going to be applying this negative right here to the entirety of the number line, and we're going to see what it does. So as we've seen in the previous videos, negatives have this idea of changing direction, because what a negative really is it's just kind of the opposite direction as what a positive is. So with that idea in mind, let's look at how it'll affect the number line. All right, so I've got a couple of number lines right here, and I want to apply a negative to this number line. Well, if a negative changes the direction of things, and we want to change the direction of everything on here, that should mean that all of these positives, everything to the right of 0, should then go to the left of 0, and everything to the left of 0, all the negatives, should go to the right of 0. So that'll essentially result in us flipping this number line. So if I do that, what do I get? We see that all the negatives are now on the right and all the negatives are now on the left. And we've essentially just taken this and we've flipped it, right? But let's see where things line up. We see that 0 stays fixed, and we saw that with multiplication and division, 0 always stays fixed. And that's because 0 doesn't really have a direction, right? Direction is all relative to 0. So what would 0's direction be? It's just kind of in the very middle, right? When you flip something around, something always stays put. In this case, if I flip this pen around, the middle of the pen there stays put, right? So similarly, the middle of this number line staying put, namely at 0. All right, perfect. So if I ask you what would applying a negative to 8 look like, well, it lines up with -8. It makes sense, right? What's the negative of 7? -7. What's the -3? -3, right? But maybe something a little more interesting would be, what is the negative of -6? So the negative of -6. Well, that lines up with 6, so it has to be 6, right? Or what's the negative of -8? Well, -8 lines up with 8, so it has to be 8, right? So this is one perspective that we get where the negative of a negative number gives us a positive again, because we basically reverse the direction of the negatives, which started on the left of 0, but now they're on the right of 0, which means that they become positive. Now, where this becomes really interesting is with mirrors. So at this point, hopefully you'll be seeing me in front of a mirror. Well, what is something that's characteristic with mirrors? You probably know that if you hold up an image in a mirror, it gets flipped, right? And so I'm going to hold up this number line here, and we'll see that the number line, it looks backwards in the mirror. So essentially we can kind of think of this mirror flipping things as basically applying a negative to the image, right? So it's applying a negative to the image of the number line that I'm holding up to it. So hopefully that was an interesting perspective. And now we're going to discuss applying multiple negatives. All right. So if I have something like -8, what's that going to be? Well, this is how we can think about it. We start with 8 here, and we apply the first negative, right? So this first negative here, that'll flip our number line, right? And so now our 8 lines up with -8. But now we're going to apply the negative again. And when we do that, well, a negative, that changes the direction of everything. So that's going to cause us to flip the number line again. And we see that the 8 now lines up with 8, where it started with. And if we apply the negative again, we're just flipping it back and forth, right? 8 is going to line up with -8 now, right? So that was from applying 3 negatives. If we apply a 4th negative, that's going to flip it back again. And we see that 8 is once again back with 8. And when we apply this last negative here, it's going to flip it back, and we're going to see that 8 lines up with -8, which means that this thing overall equals -8. So the fast way of doing this is, if I take my number line here and I flip it once, that's going to line up this 8 with -8, right? And if I were to flip it 2 times, so I flip it once, and then I flip it again, I'm back to where I started, right? If I flip it a 3rd time, the positive will line up with the negative. If I flip it a 4th time, the positive will be back to where I started. So the rule that we get with this is that even flips So if you have an even number of flips, right? So 2 flips, 4 flips, 8 flips, that means you get back to where you started. And if I have an odd number of flips, that means that positives line up with negatives, right? For example, 1 flip, the 8 will line up with -8. 2 flips, it'll go back to normal, but then we add a 3rd flip, which is odd again, and that takes us back to the flipped image, right? So if I had something like -5, we can flip it back and forth a bunch of times, but really we can just count 1 flip, 2 flips, 3 flips. That's an odd number of flips, which means that this has to simplify to -5. And if we were to do that, we get 1 flip, 2 flips, 3 flips. We see that 5 lines up with -5, right? So we flipped it 3 times, which is applying a -3 times, but we ultimately get simplified to -5 because it was an odd number of flips. And as one more example, if I did -10, let's say, that's equivalent to us flipping this 6 times. 6 is an even number, so that means we're going to go back to where we started and we're going to get a positive 10 since we changed our direction 6 times. And if we do that here, we're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're back to where we started, right? Which means that applying 6 negatives to any number on the number line will be the same as doing nothing to it. You just get back to where you started. Applying 3 negatives to any number on the number line will give you the negative version of that number. Alright, so I hope that made sense. And now we're going to actually go back to the mirror example. Have you ever tried this trick where you have 2 mirrors in front of each other, and if you look inside of one, there's kind of like just this image that keeps on repeating, and it's like an infinite mirror glitch in the matrix, if you want to call it that, right? It's going back and forth, and you just get smaller and smaller images, and if your eyes could see infinitely small, maybe they would see, infinite images. But in any case, we can actually think about this in terms of the flipping. So if you look at the video, you see that there is a mirror in front of my face, and I'm holding up the number line to that mirror. So inside of that mirror, as we saw before, it's going to be flipped. It's going to look backwards, right? But as you see in the video, you're actually seeing the number line perfectly normal. And the reason for that is because the video is looking inside of another mirror. So the first mirror flips the image, that's applying 1 negative. And then the second mirror flips the image again, so that's applying another negative. But applying 2 negatives is an even number of negatives being applied. So as a result, it looks like nothing has happened to the image, which is why it's perfectly straight like that. Alright, well, this was a little bit of a shorter episode today, but in any case, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got a lot out of it. I will see you next time for some practice questions, but until then, have a good one, stay groovy, and I'll see you in the next video.